You come here with questions that burn quietly in the depths of your soul. Questions that are not easily spoken aloud, but are carried like stones in the pockets of your heart. Why do you, who feel so much, who sense with uncanny precision the moods of others, so often find yourself dissolving into relationships that drain you? Why does the empath, who possesses such a luminous gift of sensitivity, end up imprisoned in dynamics that seem inescapable, as though fate itself were conspiring to keep you bound? I tell you, this mystery lies not merely in the outer world, but in the invisible chambers of the psyche, in that place where shadow and light intermingle, where archetypes weave their threads into the story of your life. To lose oneself in another is not simply an error of choice. It is a phenomenon rooted in the ancient patterns of the unconscious, where the archetype of the lover, of the wounded child, of the savior stirs and demands expression. The empath does not merely meet a partner, they meet their own projection. What you call love is so often the recognition of yourself in another, though you cannot yet name it. It is the soul's mirror, held up by the unconscious, showing you what you have refused to face within. The unconscious is not content to remain buried. It insists on dramatizing itself through the theater of relationships, and so the empath enters not into a simple partnership, but into a labyrinth of mirrors, each reflection blurring where they end and where the other begins. Consider the symbol of water. Empathy is like water, it flows, it adapts, it carries what it touches. But water, when it forgets its own banks, when it overflows its boundaries, can flood and destroy. The empaths, when they neglect their own boundaries, becomes the flood. They dissolve into the other, surrendering their own form, until they no longer recognize themselves. This is not an act of weakness, but of unconscious compulsion. It is the psyche seeking wholeness through union, yet choosing union without discernment. It is the archetype of the anima or animus, that eternal image of the inner counterpart, projected upon the beloved, so that what you are truly longing for is not them, but the missing part of yourself. And yet, why can you not escape? Why? Once you awaken to the pain, does it seem impossible to walk away? Here we must descend into the shadow. The shadow is not merely the dark impulses of aggression or desire. It is everything you have denied, everything you have rejected as unworthy. For the empath, the shadow often contains anger, selfishness, the right to say no, the right to exist as an individual, because these elements were exiled in childhood, perhaps by parents who demanded compliance, or by a world that punished your sensitivity. You cast them away into the unconscious, but what is rejected inwardly will return outwardly. The partner you cannot leave often embodies these rejected qualities. You feel bound to them because they hold the key to the parts of yourself you have buried. The very dynamic that enslaves you is also the one that could set you free, if only you dared to face what it mirrors. Let me speak plainly. When you are bound in such a relationship, you are not only loving another, you are wrestling with your own unconscious. You are entangled with an archetypal figure that exceeds the human partner before you. they become larger than life, a figure you cannot release, because to release them feels like losing a piece of your own soul. The longing, the addiction, the inability to break free, these are the signs of archetypal possession. The unconscious has seized you, and it will not let go until you learn what it has to teach. This is why willpower alone often fails. You are not fighting the person, you are fighting a God image within yourself. Dreams often betray this truth. Many of you have dreamt of houses with flooded rooms, of drowning, of being pursued by faceless figures. These are the images of empathy uncontained, of selfhood overwhelmed, or you dream of being trapped, doors locked, corridors endless. The psyche speaks in symbols, warning that the relationship you cling to is not merely personal, it is an inner drama demanding recognition. To analyze the dream is to glimpse the unconscious script behind the relationship. For the empath, the dream reveals the prison they themselves have constructed, for the bars are made of their own unacknowledged needs, their own fear of abandonment, their own hunger to be seen. But let us not condemn empathy itself, for empathy is sacred. It is the capacity to bridge the abyss between souls, to feel the heartbeat of creation itself. The danger is not in empathy, but in its unconsciousness. The empath who knows themselves, who honors their own center, can love without dissolving, can give without losing. But the empath who remains unconscious of their own shadow, their own boundaries, will always be devoured by the very gift that makes them radiant. Thus, the path of liberation is not to harden, not to become indifferent, but to awaken, to bring light into the unconscious patterns that bind you, so that what once enslaved you may become the source of your freedom. When I say you must awaken, I do not mean with cold rationality alone. The rational mind cannot untangle archetypal knots. It requires a descent into the depths. You must confront the archetypes themselves, the inner child that longs to be rescued, the lover who seeks union, the shadow who demands recognition. This confrontation is not comfortable. It feels like death because it requires the dissolution of illusions you have clung to. But what dies is not your true self. It is the false image you projected onto another. The pain of letting go is the pain of retrieving your soul from where you left it. You may ask, why does the empath give so much? Why do they love beyond reason? Because within them lies an ancient wound, the wound of invisibility. As children, empaths often perceived the unspoken, felt the moods of those around them, and took responsibility for what was not theirs. In doing so, they lost touch with their own needs. To love another excessively is an attempt to secure love in return, to heal the wound of never having been fully seen. But the tragedy is that the more you give in order to be recognized, the more invisible you become. For the partner does not see you. They see only what you provide. And so the cycle continues, the wound deepening until you can no longer distinguish whether you are loving or begging. Let us return to the symbol of the labyrinth. To lose yourself in another is to wander its winding corridors, each turn promising an exit yet leading deeper within. The Minotaur who guards its heart is none other than your own shadow. To face it is terrifying, for it bears the face of rage, of selfishness, of the needs you have denied. But until you confront it, you will remain wandering, ensnared in relationships that echo the same pattern. The key is not to slay the Minotaur, but to integrate it, to acknowledge I to have a right to exist, I to may demand, may protect, may set boundaries. When you embrace this truth, the labyrinth dissolves and the path outward is revealed. Now hear me. Love does not require self-annihilation. True love is the union of two whole beings, not the merging of fragments. The empath's journey is to reclaim the fragments they have scattered into others, to call back their projections, to stand in their own fullness. Only then can love flourish without chains. Only then can you give without losing, receive without drowning. The relationship you cannot escape becomes the crucible of transformation. For in its fire, you are forced to confront the deepest mysteries of your own psyche, to see not only the beloved, but yourself reflected in their eyes. Thus I tell you, do not despair if you have lost yourself, if you feel trapped in bonds that suffocate, for this very suffering is the summons of your soul. It is the invitation to descend into the depths, to face the archetypes, to reclaim your shadow. And though the path is arduous, though it feels at times like walking through fire, it is the only path that leads to wholeness. The empath's fate is not to be consumed, but to be reborn, to rise, not as one who loses themselves, but as one who knows themselves so deeply that no relationship can bind them against their will. And yet, even when the empath begins to glimpse the truth of these patterns, the chains do not immediately dissolve, for liberation is not an intellectual act. You may know in your mind that you are enmeshed, that the other person embodies your projections, that the archetype of the savior or the child or the shadow has been awakened within you, but the knowledge does not free you. Why? Because the unconscious demands not only recognition, but experience. You must live through the drama, feel its fire, and allow it to transform you. The psyche is not satisfied with abstract truths. It insists upon incarnation. This is why relationships so often become crucibles of suffering. They are not accidents, nor mere mistakes, but alchemical vessels where the soul seeks to purify itself through fire. Consider the image of alchemy, that ancient art which was never only about turning lead into gold, but about the transformation of the soul itself. The empath in a binding relationship is like the alchemist's prima materia, raw, chaotic, without form. The relationship becomes the alembic, sealed tight, where the pressure of intensity cannot be escaped. You burn, you dissolve, you despair. But it is precisely in this confinement that transformation becomes possible. Without the vessel, the fire would dissipate. Without the relationship, the unconscious would remain abstract. And so you are held until you learn to claim the gold hidden. within the suffering, the goal of individuation, of becoming whole. You may ask, why does the empath endure? Why do they not simply break the bond and walk away? Because the unconscious holds them in thrall. The archetype is a force of nature, a God image. Within the psyche, you cannot simply command it with a will. When the archetype of Eros is activated, when the anima or animus is projected, the beloved becomes transfigured with numinous power. They are no longer merely human, they are divine. Magnetic, intoxicating. To leave them feels like betraying the gods themselves. This is why you tremble, why you return again and again despite the pain. You are caught in a sacred drama, and until you recognize it as such, you will confuse archetypal compulsion for personal choice. Dreams reveal this intoxication. Perhaps you dream of temples, of altars, of offering yourself in sacrifice, of being bound with ropes you cannot cut, or of endless journeys through foreign landscapes, seeking something you never find. These are not random phantasms, they are revelations of the unconscious, dramatizing your entanglement with the archetypal realm. The beloved has become an altar upon which you sacrifice yourself. But the true sacrifice demanded is not your life to them, but your illusions to yourself. The ropes cannot be cut with the sword of will. They dissolve only when you turn inward and face the God image you have projected outward. Let us descend further into the psychology of the empath. The empath feels the other's pain often more acutely than their own. Why? Because to feel another's pain is safer than to feel their own. The empaths who grew up in an environment where their needs were unmet or punished learned to attune outwardly. They became experts in reading moods, in anticipating danger, in soothing others. Their survival depended on it. But this adaptation, while once necessary, becomes a prison in adulthood. The empath's gaze remains fixed outward, while their inner life withers. They drown in others because they have forgotten how to swim in themselves. Thus, every relationship becomes an attempt to reclaim what was lost, the right to exist, to feel, to be seen. But tragically, the more they give, the more they disappear, and the wound deepens. This is the paradox. The empath believes that giving endlessly will secure love, yet the more they give, the less they are recognized. The beloved sees only the flood of devotion, not the soul behind it. And so the empath cries silently, "When will someone see me?" But they cannot be seen until they see themselves. They cannot be loved until they love the parts of themselves they have abandoned. For no partner, however benevolent, can replace the recognition. You deny yourself. This is the bitter medicine. The partner who refuses to see you is a mirror of your own refusal. And so the work begins with shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is the container of all you have disowned. For the empath, the shadow holds anger, desire, boundaries, and power. You recoil from these qualities because they were condemned in your early life. But what you exile within will return without. The controlling partner, the abusive lover, the narcissistic figure, all are embodiments of the shadow. You cannot yet claim They enact for you what you refuse to enact for yourself. Until you say no, you will find partners who say no for you. Until you hold your ground, you will find partners who dominate you. Until you claim your anger, you will attract those who express it for you. This is the law of the psyche. What is unconscious will be lived outwardly as fate. It is tempting to hate the one who holds you bound, but to hate them is to miss the deeper truth. They are an actor in the drama of your soul, playing a role assigned by the unconscious. They are both jailer and liberator, shadow and mirror. To reject them entirely is to risk rejecting the lesson they carry. This does not mean you must remain with them forever, no. Often you must leave to survive, but you must not leave without understanding, for if you depart in blindness, the unconscious will send another actor to play the same role, and you will repeat the cycle until you see. Thus the path forward is integration. You must call back your projections. You must face the inner child who longs for rescue and tell them, I will not abandon you. You must confront the shadow who rages and demands and tell them, you have a place at my table. You must recognize the archetype of the beloved within yourself and tell them, I do not need to find you outside, for you dwell within me. When these inner figures are welcomed, the outer compulsions lose their grip. The beloved is no longer a god, but a human. The prison door swings open, not by force, but because you no longer need the chains. Hear me well. Liberation does not come by rejecting empathy. It comes by transforming it. When empathy is unconscious, it is possession. When empathy is conscious, it is power. To feel another without losing yourself is the highest art. It requires that you stand firmly in your own center, that you know your boundaries, that you recognize your shadow. Then empathy becomes a bridge, not a flood. You can enter the other's world without drowning, because you have anchored yourself in your own. This is the destiny of the empath, not to be consumed, but to become a conscious vessel of connection, to unite without annihilation, to love without losing. Think of the image of the chalice. The chalice holds water, but it is not the water. Its form gives shape. Its boundaries allow the liquid to be contained and offered. The empath must become the chalice. Without form, their love spills aimlessly. With form, it becomes sacred offering. The chalice does not cease to be itself when filled, nor when poured out, it remains. So must you remain even in love. To remain is to honor your own soul, and in doing so, to honor the soul of the other. For only when two chalices meet can true communion occur. And so, my friends, when you find yourself asking why you cannot escape, know this: you are not trapped by another, but by your own unconscious. You are held not by chains of iron, but by bonds of projection. The beloved is not your jailer, your own unacknowledged self is. And the key lies not in destroying the other, but in turning inward, in facing what you fear most, yourself. When you dare to do so, the spell is broken. The archetype is integrated, and love becomes no longer a prison. but the path to wholeness. When we look deeply into the empath's entanglement, we begin to see that the real terror is not of the other, but of emptiness. To walk away from the relationship that consumes you feels like walking into nothingness. The other has become the structure around which your inner chaos organizes itself. Without them, you fear collapse, and so you cling, not because the relationship gives life, but because it holds your fragments together. This is why separation feels like death, because, in truth, a death is occurring. The death of the false self that has been built upon another's gaze, and yet only through such death can rebirth arise. It is the same mystery enacted in myths across cultures. Think of Persephone descending into Hades. She resists, she mourns, yet in the underworld she discovers a deeper truth. The empath, too, is dragged into the underworld of relationships that feel like prisons. But this descent is not punishment. It is initiation. It is only in the depths of entrapment that the empath is forced to face the ghosts of their past, the unmet needs, the invisible wounds, the exiled shadow. To resist this descent is to remain forever on the surface, repeating patterns without end. To surrender is to pass through death into transformation. There is a rhythm to the soul's development. First, the innocent openness of childhood, where empathy flows freely, then the adaptation to survive, where empathy hardens into vigilance and self-sacrifice, then the repetition in adulthood, where the wound plays itself out again and again, and finally, the awakening, where what was unconscious is brought to light. The empath who finds themselves trapped has reached the third stage. The suffering signals that the unconscious is pressing toward consciousness. If you do not flee from the pain, but turn toward it, you will enter the fourth stage, where freedom begins. Let us speak of projection, for it is the central mechanism by which the empath loses themselves. You imagine you see the other clearly, but in truth, you see only what your unconscious casts upon them. The beloved becomes a canvas for your deepest longings and fears. You see their pain and rush to heal it, not realizing it is your own unhealed pain you are tending. You see their strength and cling to it, not realizing it is your own disowned power you worship. You see their darkness and recoil, not realizing it is your own shadow you are fleeing. In this way, you never truly meet the other. You meet yourself, disguised, and so the relationship becomes less about love than about unconscious recognition. But there is a paradox here. Projection is not simply error, it is also revelation. Through projection, the unconscious shows you what you cannot yet see directly. The partner who drains you reveals your lack of boundaries. The partner who dominates you reveals your buried anger. The partner who abandons you reveals your inner child's terror of rejection. If you can withdraw the projection, if you can see the other as a mirror rather than a god, then the relationship becomes a teacher. But as long as the projection remains unconscious, you are enslaved by it. This is why the empath cannot escape easily. The unconscious does not release its grip until the lesson is integrated. If you flee too soon, the same archetype will reappear in a new guise, different face, same pattern. The psyche is relentless in its pursuit of wholeness. It will summon again and again the very figures who wound you until you recognize that they are fragments of yourself demanding integration. Let us return to dreams, for they are the royal road to the unconscious. An empath trapped in such a bond may dream of locked rooms, of endless staircases, of doors that open only to reveal more doors. These images symbolize the entrapment within one's own psyche. Or perhaps you dream of children crying in the dark, waiting for someone who never comes. This is the voice of your inner child, abandoned long ago, now seeking recognition. Or you dream of floods, of being swept away by waves too vast to resist. This is empathy, unbounded, feeling without containment. To interpret these dreams is to see the inner story beneath the outer relationship. They are not meaningless, they are the psyche's attempt to awaken you. In such moments, one must ask, what is being demanded of me? The answer is always the same. Individuation. The unconscious presses you toward wholeness. The relationship you cannot escape is the crucible in which your fragments are exposed. The beloved is not only a partner, they are the carrier of your soul's hidden content. The more you resist, the tighter the grip. The more you surrender to seeing, the freer you become. It is here that the empath confronts their greatest fear, selfishness. To set boundaries feels cruel. To say no feels like betrayal. To withdraw feels like abandonment. But these are illusions created by childhood conditioning. The child who once had to please in order to survive still believes that to assert themselves is dangerous. And so the adult empath continues the pattern, but individuation requires the courage to disappoint, to withdraw, to refuse, not from hatred, but from truth. For only when you claim your right to exist do you step out of the prison of endless giving. Think of the archetype of the phoenix. It burns, it dies, it rises anew. The empath too must allow the false self, the self that exists only for others, to burn away. The ashes are painful, for you feel emptied, lost. But from those ashes rises a self that is whole, not dependent on another's validation. This is the rebirth. The unconscious demands. Without it, empathy remains a curse. With it, empathy becomes the highest form of love. And so, I say to you, if you feel trapped, know that you are standing at the threshold of transformation. The relationship that consumes you is both your prison and your initiation. Do not flee blindly, nor remain in blindness. Turn inward. Ask what part of you this bond reflects. Ask what shadow it calls forth. Ask what child within you cries to be seen. Then, with trembling courage, we begin to call those parts home. The more you embrace them, the less you need to lose yourself in another. One day, you will look back and see that the partner you could not leave was not the enemy, but the teacher. They forced you to see what you would not have faced otherwise. They carried your shadow until you were strong enough to carry it yourself. And in this recognition, gratitude arises not for the pain, but for the transformation. For it is through suffering that the soul awakens. When the empath finally begins to reclaim the fragments of themselves, a curious thing happens. The relationship that once felt like an iron cage begins to loosen its grip, not because the other changes, but because your perception changes. The beloved, once transfigured by projection, begins to shrink to human size. You see them not as a god, not as a demon, but as a person flawed, complex, no more or less divine than yourself. This recognition is painful, for it strips away the intoxication of archetypal possession, but it is also liberating, for only when you stop worshipping the other can you begin to stand in your own sacredness. This awakening is not without grief. You grieve the illusion, the dream of salvation through another. You grieve the years spent dissolving into someone else's needs. You grieve the child within who believed that if they gave enough, they would finally be loved. This grief is holy. Do not rush it. Do not suppress it. For in the tears shed for lost illusions, the soul cleanses itself. Through grief, the false dies, and the true emerges. There is always a temptation, once awakened, to swing to the opposite, extreme to harden, to renounce empathy, to vow never to give again. But this is another form of possession, the possession of the shadow that now overcompensates for years of self-sacrifice. True transformation lies not in rejection, but in integration. You need not become cold to be whole. You need not forsake sensitivity to gain strength. Rather, you must marry them within yourself, to be both tender and strong, open and bounded, receptive and sovereign. This is individuation. Think of the Taoist symbol of yin and yang. Light contains darkness, darkness contains light. So it must be with the empath. To feel deeply is not weakness, if it is balanced with boundaries. To say no is not cruelty, if it is balanced with compassion. The empath's destiny is to embody this union, to show the world that love can be both boundless and grounded, both giving and discerning. But such embodiment requires the long journey through shadow, through projection, through suffering. There are no shortcuts. Consider again the archetype of the lover. In its unconscious form, it enslaves. In its conscious form, it liberates. The unconscious lover seeks wholeness in another, clings, demands, loses itself. The conscious lover knows that true union can only occur between two whole beings. The empath who has awakened becomes such a lover. They no longer give to be seen. They give because they are seen by themselves. They no longer drown in others. They meet others at the shoreline, where two seas touch but do not consume. This is sacred love. Eros transfigured into agape. Desire transformed into communion. I tell you this, every empath who has suffered inescapable relationships has been chosen for a deeper calling. The very sensitivity that once enslaved you will, when awakened, become your greatest gift to the world, for you will know how to listen where others cannot. You will know how to feel what others deny. You will know how to hold space for another without losing yourself. This is not sentimentality, it is power. For in a world that is deaf to the soul, the conscious empath becomes its voice, but beware, this path is not for the faint of heart. To claim your gift, you must endure the fire. You must be willing to see illusions shattered, to face loneliness, to walk into the emptiness you once feared. You must descend into the labyrinth and face the minotaur of your own shadow. Only then will you find the thread of Ariadne, the golden line that leads you out, and when you emerge, you will not be the same. You will be more yourself than ever before, and that self will be radiant. In myth, the wounded healer often emerges from such journeys. Chiron, the immortal centaur, could not heal his own wound, yet became the healer of others, the empath, to carry such a destiny. Your wound, the wound of invisibility, of self-loss, of entanglement, becomes the very place where compassion is born. Not the unconscious compassion that destroys, but the conscious compassion that restores. From your wound flows a gift, if you do not reject it, but you must first tend it yourself, for only then can you tend it in others. I would leave you with an image. Imagine standing before a mirror. For years you gazed into it and saw only others, their needs, their pain, their demands filled the reflection. You forgot your own face. Now, slowly, you wipe the mirror clean, the fog clears, and for the first time, you see yourself not the projection, not the child, not the shadow disguised as the beloved, but you, whole, luminous, bearing both darkness and light. This is the moment of liberation. The relationship you could not escape was always pointing you back to this mirror. And now, at last, you behold yourself. When you leave this hall tonight, the patterns may still tempt you. The unconscious does not yield easily. But you will carry with you a seed, the seed of awareness, and if you water it with courage, if you tend it with honesty, it will grow into strength. You will no longer fear emptiness, for you will discover that emptiness is not void, but space where your soul can breathe. You will no longer lose yourself, for you will have found yourself, and in finding yourself, you will finally know how to love. So do not curse your empathy. Do not despise your sensitivity. They were never your enemies. They were simply awaiting the fire of transformation. You are not condemned to repeat the old cycles forever. You are being invited to rise, to step out of the prison of unconscious love into the freedom of conscious union, to be both empath and individual, both giver and receiver, both chalice and water. And when that day comes, when you stand in your wholeness, you will look into the eyes of another and see them not as your savior, not as your captor, but as your fellow traveler. And in that gaze, there will be no chains, no loss, no dissolution. There will only be love, true love, born of freedom, anchored in wholeness, radiant with the mystery of the soul. This is the path I place before you. It is not easy, but it is real. Walk it, and you will no longer ask why empaths lose themselves in relationships they cannot escape. You will know that the answer was always this, so that they might one day find themselves, and in finding themselves, transform love itself.